My name is Anya. Or rather, that's what they call me now, when I'm almost 30, and I've learned to embrace this simple, clear name. As a child, I hated it for its brevity and ordinariness. I wanted to be some Isabella or Angelica, the heroine of a soap opera that my grandmother watched secretly from my parents. Life seemed like an endless novel to me back then, in which I was destined to play the leading role, full of drama and exotic adventures. Reality, as often happens, turned out to be much more prosaic, but no less meaningful. And if I were asked to tell my story today, I would begin not with my birth or my first step, but with a smell. With the smell of sun-warmed asphalt after a short summer rain. Our courtyard was an entire universe. A 9-story panel building, built in a U-shape, formed a closed, safe space in which our entire childhood lives unfolded. At the center of this universe, like the sun, stood an old wooden slide, painted a poisonous blue. And a creaky swing on which you could soar so high that for a moment it seemed as if your feet were about to touch the clouds. The world beyond the courtyard existed, but it was somehow foggy, adult, and uninteresting. There was work, the store, the dacha, boring places where our parents went and from which they returned tired. Real life was here, between the peeling walls covered in chalk and the dusty lilac bushes where we built our headquarters. My family lived on the 7th floor. Mom, Dad, and I. Mom was the embodiment of warmth and anxiety. She smelled of vanilla and something elusively floral from her hand cream. Her life, it seems to me now, consisted of an endless series of chores: cooking, cleaning, laundry, checking homework, curing a cold. She rarely smiled broadly and carefree. Hers was soft, a little tired, but full of tenderness. Dad was different. He was silent and thorough. He smelled of metal, machine oil, and tobacco. His hands, rough and strong, could fix anything in the house, from a leaky faucet to my broken bike. He rarely spoke of love, but his love was in those repaired things, in the chocolate he brought me late at night, in the way he silently stroked my head as I fell asleep in his lap to the murmur of the television. Childhood in the 90s is a kaleidoscope of strange, sometimes contradictory images. I remember empty store shelves and the sudden appearance of brightly colored imported sweets. I remember my mother's sighs over the family budget, and simultaneously, the feeling of absolute happiness over the new Barbie doll our parents had been saving up for months. We didn't feel deprived. Our wealth wasn't measured in money, but in time. Time that passed slowly and sweetly, like a kiss-kiss toffee stuck to your teeth. Summer days were endless. They began with the cry of "go for a walk," coming from the open window, and ended with my mother's tired "Anya, come home," as dusk deepened and warm lights flickered in the windows. We played cops and robbers, racing through the entire neighborhood, knowing every secret passage and every hole in the fence. We built sandcastles in the sandbox, which in the evenings turned into a gathering place for the grandmothers on the benches. We listened to their conversations about politics, illnesses, and market prices, and these conversations were the backdrop to our own, far more important lives. Each season had its ritual. In the spring, we sailed boats on the rushing streams of melting snow and delightedly inhaled the scent of wet earth. In the summer, we ate green apricots straight from the tree, risking stomach aches, and sunbathed on the roofs of garages until we were blackened. In the fall, we collected colorful leaves for herbariums and lit fires in which we baked potatoes stolen from the house. In the winter, we built snow forts and slid down an icy slide until our cheeks ached, flooded with water by Uncle Collier, our janitor, a perpetually gloomy but kind-hearted man. It was a world where everything was real. Friendship was genuine, even before oaths were sworn in blood stained with green paint. The grievances were genuine, to the point of tears and cries of "I'm not friends with you anymore," which, however, were forgotten the next day. The joy was deafening and all-consuming. The courtyard was our school of life, where we learned to share, negotiate, protect our own, and fight back. And at the center of this personal universe of mine was Lena. Lena lived in the building next door. She was a year older, a head taller, and infinitely braver than me. She had sharp knees, perpetually covered in bruises and scrapes, and short-cropped blonde hair that stuck out in all directions like a dandelion. Lena was afraid of nothing. She was the first to climb the tallest trees, the first to venture into a dark basement, the first to taste unfamiliar berries. I, on the other hand, was a quiet, homely girl who loved reading books and drawing princesses. It seemed we were completely different, but from the first day we met, when she approached me in the sandbox and categorically declared, "Let's be friends," we were inseparable. Lena opened up a world beyond my books. With her, I learned to climb fences, shoot a slingshot, and understand the language of birds. At least that's what she claimed, and I believed her. We were explorers, discoverers of uncharted lands that were, in reality, nothing more than an abandoned construction site behind our house. This construction site was our kingdom. The unfinished building of grey concrete, with its empty window sockets, seemed like a mysterious castle to us. We'd sneak in through a hole in the fence, and the ordinary world would be left behind. Inside, it smelled of damp, cement, and freedom. We wandered through the echoing rooms, inventing stories about who had lived here before. We found treasures, a rusty nail, a shard of stained glass, an old button. Each find became steeped in legend. Our headquarters was on the second floor, in a room overlooking our yard. We dragged there an old mattress we'd found in a dumpster, and a few boxes instead of a table and chairs. It was our refuge, a place where we shared our deepest secrets. We dreamed of growing up. Lena wanted to become a veterinarian to save all the homeless cats and dogs. I wanted to be a writer to chronicle all our adventures. We kept a shared journal, a thick, squared notebook that we hid under the mattress. We wrote down the rules of our secret society, drew treasure maps, and glued "Love is" gum wrappers to it. Love is understanding each other without words, one of the pictures read. And we really did understand each other with just a glance. One day, we decided to go on a long journey, to the river, which was on the other side of town. We didn't tell our parents, of course. We packed provisions, a couple of apples, a piece of bread, and a bottle of water. The journey seemed endlessly long and full of dangers. We walked along a dusty road, past unfamiliar houses and barking dogs. When we finally reached the river, we were tired, but incredibly proud of ourselves. The river was wide, muddy, and not nearly as beautiful as in the books. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that we'd done it ourselves. We sat on the bank, dangling our feet in the cool water, feeling grown up and independent. That evening, of course, we got into trouble. Our parents were going crazy with worry. We'd been scolded and placed under house arrest. But lying in my bed, I felt no remorse. I felt only joy and pride. Lena and I were a team. We were a force to be reckoned with. And I knew that as long as she was by my side, I wouldn't be afraid of anything. Our friendship seemed as eternal as the sky above. We couldn't imagine life without each other. We were two halves of a whole, two boots that make a pair. But childhood, no matter how endless it seems, has a way of ending. And it usually ends when something new, incomprehensible, and deeply exciting bursts into your life. Something that smells like lilac and breaks your heart into a million pieces. The transition to middle school marked the first major rift in Lena's and my world. We were assigned to different classes. It felt like a catastrophe of cosmic proportions. We still saw each other during recess and for walks after school, but something had subtly changed. We each had new acquaintances, new interests. Lena became interested in sports and joined the volleyball team. She could increasingly be seen in the company of the tall, loud girls on her team. I, however, still preferred books and the quiet corners of the school library. And then he came into my life. Sasha. He was in the same class as me. Tall, slightly stooped, with perpetually tousled dark hair and pensive grey eyes. He wasn't the most handsome guy in school, but there was something special about him. A kind of inner stillness that drew me like a magnet. It all started with something stupid. I dropped a stack of books in the hallway, and he helped me pick them up. Our fingers accidentally touched, and an electric shock ran through my arm. I looked up and was lost in his gaze. In that moment, the entire noisy school hallway ceased to exist for me. We started talking. At first, it was just small talk during recess. Then he started walking me home. We walked through our neighborhood, and I rediscovered the streets I'd known since childhood. It turned out the old poplar tree by my entrance wasn't just a tree, but the perfect spot for my first, awkward kiss. It turned out the scent of blooming lilacs, once simply a part of spring, could drive me crazy and make my heart beat 100 times faster. Sasha wrote poetry. Clumsy, adolescent poetry, but for me, it was more beautiful than Pushkin. He would whisper it to me as we sat on our favorite park bench. He talked about the stars, about eternity, about the meaning of life. With him, I felt special, understood, grown up. My world narrowed to one person. Lena faded into the background. I felt like she wouldn't understand the depth of my feelings. When I tried to tell her about Sasha, she brushed me off and steered the conversation toward volleyball or the new movie. I saw something resembling jealousy or resentment in her eyes, but I was too consumed with my first love to pay attention. Our secret society at the abandoned construction site ceased to exist. The diary was abandoned and forgotten. My affair with Sasha was a bright flash, a comet streaking across the sky of my youth. It was full of secret meetings, long phone conversations until the early hours, notes passed across the classroom. But, like any comet, it had its end. It all ended as suddenly as it began. One day, he simply stopped calling me. I saw him at school. He'd avert his eyes and walk past. I didn't understand what had happened. The world had collapsed. The lilacs had faded, and their scent began to make me nauseous. I cried for weeks. I felt like my life was over. That's when Lena rang my doorbell. She came in silently, sat down next to me on the bed, hugged me, and said, "He's a jerk." That simple, blunt phrase held more support than 1,000 beautiful words. She didn't ask what happened. She was simply there. She brought my favorite chocolate cake and made me eat it all. We talked all night, just like before. And I realized how much I missed her. Our friendship wasn't the same. We both matured, we changed. But that night brought back something important to us, the realization that, despite all the changes, we were still family. The first goodbye of my life wasn't with Sasha. It was with the carefree girl I was before him. The one who believed in eternal love and unbreakable friendship. I realized that people can leave, feelings can fade, and friendships can transform. And it was painful. But that was life. High school flew by in a haze of exam preparation. Dreams of stars and eternity gave way to cramming formulas and dates. The future, which had previously seemed so distant and abstract, suddenly loomed over us, demanding a choice. A choice on which, as adults told us, our entire future lives depended. The pressure was enormous. Teachers, parents, society. Everyone insisted on the importance of getting into a good university. Our small provincial town felt like a cage to me. I dreamed of breaking free, of moving to a big city with a metro, tall buildings, theaters, and museums, where life was vibrant, not sluggish like our muddy river. I chose the capital as my goal. The journalism department. I still thought I was born to write. Lena, contrary to my expectations, decided to stay. The lights of the big city didn't beckon her. She was planning to enroll in our local teacher training college, in the physical education department. "I'll be raising new champions," she laughed. I didn't understand her. I felt like staying meant losing. We argued. We fought. I was hurt that she didn't share my ambitions. My snobbery probably hurt her. The last bell rang. White aprons, huge bows, the tears of teachers and parents. We stood in the schoolyard, which until recently had been our universe, and felt like strangers. Childhood was officially over. We released balloons into the sky, and with them, our fears, hopes, and promises. That evening, Lena and I sat for a long time on our old swings. We didn't talk about the future. We reminisced about the past. Our construction site, our diary, our childhood vows. It was sad and bright at the same time. We weren't saying goodbye to each other. We were saying goodbye to an entire era. And then there was the train. The night train was taking me to a new life. I stood by the carriage window, watching the lights of my hometown float by, feeling a mixture of delight and dread. Mom was crying on the platform. Dad squeezed my hand tightly and shoved a crumpled bill into his pocket. "Just in case," he said. For the first time, I saw in his eyes not only sternness but also boundless concern for me. I was alone on the train. For the first time in my life, truly alone. The clatter of the wheels set a new rhythm. I was traveling toward my dream. I was sure that something incredible awaited me. The capital greeted me with noise, bustle, and indifference. A huge train station, crowds of people rushing about their business, high rises propping up the grey sky. I felt small and lost. The entrance exams were hell. Sleepless nights, tons of reading, nervous tension. But I made it through. When I saw my name on the list of applicants, I didn't feel overwhelming joy. I felt only immense relief. I called my parents, then Lena. She was genuinely happy for me. And in that moment, I realized that distance doesn't destroy true connections. It simply transforms them into something else. Thus began my new chapter. A chapter in which there was no familiar courtyard, no Lena, no scent of lilacs. There was only me, a vast, alien city, and the illusion that I had finally begun to truly live. Dorm. That word still evokes mixed feelings in me. On the one hand, it's the smell of fried potatoes that permeates the hallway walls, the sound of guitar playing until the early hours, and the late-night kitchen conversations about everything under the sun. On the other, it's the constant lack of personal space, the line for the shower, the cockroaches, and the creaky beds. I shared a room with 3 other girls. We were all from different cities, with different personalities and habits. We had one thing in common. We were torn from our familiar surroundings and thrown into the boiling cauldron of student life. We learned not only journalism, but also compromise, patience, and the ability to share the last box of pasta between 4 people. Studies turned out to be completely different from what I'd imagined. Instead of exciting reports and creative assignments, there were boring lectures on the history of Russian journalism, endless notes, and stern, old-school professors. My romantic aura quickly began to fade. I realized that the desire to write wasn't enough. I needed talent, persistence, and, most importantly, the connections everyone whispered about. The big city simultaneously beckoned and overwhelmed me. I could wander its streets for hours, admiring the architecture, popping into small coffee shops, and sitting in parks with a book. But at the same time, I was acutely aware of my loneliness. There were millions of people around me, but I was a nobody. A transparent unit in the crowd. I made new acquaintances, went to student parties, but none of these connections were as deep and genuine as my friendship with Lena. We spoke on the phone less and less. We each had our own busy lives. To survive, I had to find part-time work. The money my parents sent me was barely enough for the bare necessities. I waited tables at a cafe, where I learned to smile even when a disgruntled customer was yelling at me. I was a promoter, handing out flyers at the subway, my frozen fingers numb. I wrote term papers for lazy students, hating myself for it but thrilled with the money I earned. These papers were as impersonal as the fluorescent lights in the classrooms. They drained the last of my creative energy. I almost stopped writing for myself. The dream of becoming a great writer now seemed naive and ridiculous. Reality dictated its own terms. I needed to graduate, find a normal job, and establish myself in this city. There were, of course, bright moments. My first exam session, which I passed with flying colors. My first article published in the student newspaper. My first real journalistic assignment, a report from a homeless animal exhibition, after which I cried all night, and then adopted a skinny, mangy kitten from a shelter. I named him Bublik. That little bundle of fur became my salvation from loneliness. He greeted me at the door, purred on my lap while I studied for exams, and silently listened to all my complaints about life. My student years flew by in the blink of an eye. They were difficult, poor, but in their own way, happy. It was a formative time, a time when I learned to be independent, to make decisions, and to take responsibility for them. I graduated. With honors, with distinction. I stood at the graduation ceremony, in a beautiful dress, clutching the cherished diploma in my hands, and felt an emptiness. A childhood dream had come true. I was a qualified journalist. But who had I really become? And what should I do with this freedom that had suddenly fallen upon me? After university, I was, you could say, lucky. Through friends of friends, I landed a job at a major media holding company. The office was located in a glittering glass tower in the city center. When I first walked in, it took my breath away. High-speed elevators, panoramic windows, people in expensive suits, talking on the phone in several languages. It was a world straight out of glossy magazines. The world I dreamed of when I left my small town. I was hired in the corporate communications department. My job consisted of writing press releases, news for the internal website, and progress reports. No investigations, no hard-hitting reports. Only carefully crafted texts, approved by all the authorities, full of bureaucratic jargon and empty, beautiful words. My boss, a woman of Balzac's age with an iron gaze and impeccable hairdo, made it clear from day one, this is no place for creativity. This is a place for efficiency. I became a cog in a huge machine. Every day was the same. Wake up at 7 in the morning, an hour on the crowded subway, 8 hours at the computer, surrounded by the hum of office equipment, an hour on the subway, a late dinner, and sleep. I was earning a good salary. I rented a small but cozy apartment in a residential area. I bought myself fashionable clothes, a new laptop, and a coffee machine. I could afford to go to good restaurants and vacation abroad. I had achieved everything many dream of. I had become successful. But I had never felt more miserable. Work was burning me out. I'd come home and have no energy for anything but staring blankly at the TV or scrolling through my social media feed. I'd look at photos of my former classmates. Some were working in war zones, some were making documentaries, some were writing honest, angry articles. And I was writing about how our company had once again demonstrated sustainable growth. I felt ashamed. My personal life wasn't working out either. There were some dates, short-lived romances. The men I met were just like me, tired dwellers in glass towers. We talked about work, loans, vacation plans. There was no passion, no madness, no scent of lilac in our relationship. It was more like a partnership than love. I called my parents less and less. I didn't want to upset them. They were proud of me, a girl from the provinces who had made it in the capital. I couldn't admit to them that I hated my job and my life. Lena and I corresponded occasionally. She worked as a teacher at our old school, married a classmate, and had a son. Her photos on social media radiated simple, earthly happiness. She with her husband against the backdrop of an autumn park, she with a stroller, she with a bouquet of flowers from her students. I looked at these photos and felt a twinge of envy. She had a real life. And I have a beautiful imitation. Loneliness in a big city is a special kind of torture. You're surrounded by people, but completely alone. You can scream at the top of your lungs, and no one will hear you. The only living being who understood me was my cat, Public. He greeted me, rubbed against my legs, and in his green eyes I saw more compassion than in all the people put together. I lived like this for several years. Day after day. Year after year. I got used to it. I resigned myself to it. I almost forgot that girl who dreamed of writing books and believed in miracles. The glass tower became my prison. Beautiful, comfortable, but still a prison. The breakdown happened suddenly. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting in yet another meeting. My boss was drawing some charts on a flip chart and talking about improving KPIs and optimizing business processes. I looked at her perfect manicure, the lifeless faces of my colleagues, and suddenly felt like I was suffocating. The air in the meeting room became thick and sticky. The walls began to close in. I felt like if I didn't run out of there immediately, I'd die. I stood up mid-sentence, silently walked out of the meeting room, walked to my desk, grabbed my bag, and went home. My phone was ringing off the hook with calls and messages. I didn't answer. At home, I crawled under the covers and lay there until the next morning. It wasn't just fatigue. It was complete, utter burnout. Rock bottom. The next day, I submitted my resignation. My boss looked at me like I was crazy. My colleagues shook their heads. Are you crazy? Such a job. Such a salary. They said. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt relief. The weight I'd been carrying lifted. For the first few weeks, I simply slept and did nothing. I wandered aimlessly around the city, sat in parks, fed ducks. I reacquainted myself with the world that existed outside my glass tower. I was surprised to discover that the sky was blue instead of grey, that trees had leaves, and that people on the streets sometimes smiled. One day, while sorting through old things I'd brought from my parents' house, I came across a box. It contained my childhood drawings, school diaries, and that very same thick, squared notebook Lena and I had kept. Our secret society diary. I sat down on the floor and began to read. I read about our plans to conquer the world, our secrets, our dreams. I laughed and cried. The girl who wrote these lines was so alive, so real. Where did she go? In the same box, I found my old notebook. The one I once used to write stories in. On the last page, a lighthouse was drawn on the shore of a raging sea. And the caption, "There is always light." This simple, childish phrase struck me right in the heart. I took out the laptop, which I had previously used only for work, opened a blank document, and began writing. I didn't know what would happen. I just wrote. I wrote about my childhood, about our yard, about Lena, about the scent of lilacs. The words flowed naturally. I wrote all night. And when dawn broke outside, I felt not fatigue, but an incredible surge of strength. I had found what I had lost. I found myself. I didn't look for a new office job. I decided to give myself time. I started a blog. I simply wrote short stories and essays about my life, my thoughts and feelings. I didn't expect anything. I was doing it for myself. But, to my surprise, I found readers. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. People wrote in the comments that my stories resonated with them, that they recognized themselves in them. It turned out I wasn't alone, lost in a world of glass towers. I started earning money writing. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to live on. I wrote articles for online publications and managed social media for small companies. It was unstable, but honest work. Work that I enjoyed. One day, I realized I needed to get away. Not for a vacation, but just for a change of scenery. I packed a small backpack, left Public in the care of a neighbor, and bought a train ticket. One way. To the sea. I'd never been to the sea in autumn. The autumn sea wasn't like the postcards. It was stern, grey, leaden. A cold wind ruffled my hair, and the cries of seagulls were alarming. I rented a tiny room in a small seaside town and simply lived. I walked along the deserted beach, collected stones, breathed in the salty air. I thought a lot and wrote a lot. The sound of the sea washed away all the chaff, all the falsehood that had accumulated over the years. It was there, on the shore of the cold autumn sea, that I met him. His name was Misha. He was a photographer. He was unlike the men I'd met before. He lacked the glamour and business acumen of the capital. He was calm, laconic, with kind and attentive eyes. We met by chance. He was photographing the sunset, and I was simply sitting on the sand, looking at the water. He came over and silently showed me a photo on his camera screen. It wasn't just a sunset. It was a whole story about beauty and decay, about light and shadow. We started talking. It turned out he, too, had escaped the big city, the bustle and senseless rush. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, like the tide. There were no loud words or crazy actions. There were long walks along the shore, conversations by the fireplace in a small cafe, shared silences that weren't burdensome. It was easy with him. I could be myself. I didn't have to pretend to be successful, strong, or independent. I could just be Anya. Tired, searching, real. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe we'll go back to the big city. Maybe we'll stay here by the sea. Or maybe we'll go somewhere else. I've stopped making long-term plans. I've learned to live in the here and now. Lena called me recently. We talked for over an hour, as if those years apart had never happened. She told me about her son, her work, her husband. I told her about the sea, about Misha, about writing again. I knew you'd become a writer, she said. I always believed in you. And I realized that some things in life truly don't change. My story isn't one of dizzying success. It's a story of loss and discovery. A story about how easy it is to lose yourself in pursuit of someone else's dreams, and how difficult, but crucial, it is to find your way back. I didn't become Isabella from the soap opera. I remained Anya. And today, I like that name. It smells not of exotic flowers, but of warm asphalt after rain, freshly cut grass, and a salty sea breeze. It smells of life. My life. And I hold my pen to write its next chapter.